Stellantis is, I think the technical term, a mess.
We are going for profits. We are not going for volume. And so we are going to sacrifice volume if it gives us a bigger margin.
For decades, American cars ruled the road. But something changed. Sedans started vanishing, and towering trucks and SUVs took their place. From hidden tax rules to clever legal definitions, the story of how American cars lost their edge is full of surprises. Let's discover what really happened behind the wheel. Toward the end of the year 2008, something unusual happened in Washington, D.C. The top leaders of the three most prominent American car companies, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, arrived at the Russell Senate office building after driving all the way from Detroit. It was a long journey, nearly 500 miles, and each executive chose a different vehicle made by their own company. One drove a Chevrolet Malibu, another brought a Ford Escape, and the last came in a Chrysler Aspen. All of these cars were hybrids and known for saving fuel. Their choice of transportation wasn't just practical, it was carefully planned. For many years, these three automakers had been known as the Big Three. They had not only dominated the car market in the United States, but had once led the global auto industry. America had been the birthplace of modern car manufacturing. These companies helped build highways, drive economic growth, and change the way people lived during World War II. Yet now, the companies that had once stood tall were facing serious trouble. Even though it seemed like their downfall happened fast, the problems that led to this moment had been building for a long time. Choices made over the years, both big and small, had slowly pushed them into a corner. And this road trip to Washington marked a key moment, a sign that the Big Three could no longer ignore the cracks forming beneath their wheels. Now, to understand how things got so bad, it is vital to take a closer look at the decisions, trends, and missed chances that led the American auto giants into crisis. Back in the middle of the 20th century, the car business in the United States operated with very few rules. Vehicles were built to be large, loud, and not exactly friendly to the environment. But everything started to shift during the early years of the 1960s. Lawmakers began introducing rules aimed at cleaning up the air and making cars safer to drive. Suddenly, every company had to adapt, which gave rising manufacturers a chance to compete on more equal footing. At that point, American automakers had a chance to shift their focus and develop smaller, more fuel-conscious models. However, that moment of opportunity was not seized. Instead, influenced partly by government rules and rewards, they turned their efforts toward making pickup trucks and large utility vehicles. As a result, Japanese car makers quickly became dominant in the sedan and compact car segments. By the mid-2000s, all 10 vehicles on one of the most trusted annual rankings for car quality were made by Japanese companies. The financial collapse that would later be known as the Great Recession began to take shape, primarily driven by a wave of mortgage defaults. At first glance, it may have seemed like a housing issue, but car sales were tangled in the same web. Around 1/4 of all vehicle purchases in 2006 were paid for using money borrowed against people's homes. So, when families could no longer afford to pay their mortgages, they started missing car payments too. And many who hadn't yet fallen behind began holding onto their money, too worried about the future to make large purchases. The American car giants, once confident symbols of strength, started to panic. Bankruptcy was no longer a distant fear, but a growing possibility. The companies knew that if they failed, the damage would stretch far beyond the city of Detroit. It would hit parts suppliers, local dealerships, workers across the nation, and even international partners. Their message was simple: if the auto industry collapsed, it would shake the whole country. With this warning, the leaders of these car companies made their way to Washington. They stood before Congress and explained their situation. They had already burned through $18 billion in credit and now needed help to survive. They didn't just ask, they pleaded. After receiving emergency help from the government, the American auto industry had no choice but to change its course. General Motors, in particular, went through a massive transformation. The old version of GM entered bankruptcy and became a different company called the Motors Liquidation Company. Its best assets and the well-known General Motors name were passed on to a new organization backed by the federal government. To stay afloat and prepare for the road ahead, the newly formed GM began to trim down. It discontinued several car brands including Hummer, Saturn, and Pontiac, all within a single year. It also sold off Saab. The company shut down several factories and made deep cuts to its workforce. Roughly 1 out of every 3 employees in the United States lost their jobs, and over 1/3 of GM's top-level American executives were also let go. From that point forward, GM promised to build smarter. They planned to focus on their trucks and start designing smaller vehicles that would save fuel and appeal to modern drivers. Chrysler, another major player in the industry, followed a similar path. The company focused on the brands that were still popular: Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram. Even Ford, which did not rely on government funding during the crisis, had to rethink its future. In the years leading up to the economic downturn, Ford had already sold off several high-end brands like Jaguar, Land Rover, and Aston Martin. Those decisions turned out to be smart, helping the company stay lean. At the same time, Ford developed new models like the Fusion and the Focus, and it introduced the Fiesta to American drivers. These cars were smaller, more affordable, and much better on gas than the bulky vehicles of the past. As a whole, America's top car manufacturers were learning from their mistakes. They had paid a steep price for sticking to old strategies that no longer worked. Now, they were all promising to build smaller, more innovative, and more efficient vehicles to match the future needs of drivers. Chrysler had already taken a similar step back in 2016. They stopped building the Dodge Dart and the Chrysler 200. These were 2 of their more affordable cars. After that, they chose to only keep their larger, more powerful models like the Challenger and the Chrysler 300, which was more like a luxury car. Then General Motors followed. By the time the 20s rolled around, they had also let go of several well-known cars. The Chevy Impala, Cruze, Volt, and Malibu all disappeared. The same thing happened with Cadillac's CT6 and XTS, and Buick LaCrosse. It was a quiet but steady shift. One by one, these car makers stopped offering sedans in the United States. Just a few years earlier, they had been struggling to keep up with changes in the car world. People were looking for smaller, more affordable, and greener options. But instead of adjusting, the major American brands began to move away from cars entirely. The answer came quickly. All 3 major companies started putting more focus on trucks and SUVs. That might seem like a wise choice. After all, these bigger vehicles have been very popular in the United States, especially since the big financial crisis in the late 2000s. But this trend didn't grow on its own. It was helped by something that not everyone knows about. Many believe that the demand for SUVs and trucks comes from what people genuinely want, but part of that rise came from how vehicles are labeled in the first place. What counts as a car? And what counts as a truck? That question actually matters a lot. It all goes back to rules created in the 1970s, when the country was facing an energy shortage. Back then, new laws were made to make cars more fuel efficient. This led to something called the Corporate Average Fuel Economy Standards. These rules let officials set how far a vehicle should go using a certain amount of fuel, but these rules mostly applied to regular cars, not trucks. And here's where it gets interesting. Because of how vehicles were classified, many larger cars could be labeled as trucks. That meant companies could design and sell big vehicles that didn't have to follow the same fuel rules. Over time, even vehicles that looked like cars in shape and size were given the label of light trucks. These labels helped manufacturers significantly. They could avoid stricter standards while still offering roomy, stylish rides. As a result, the number of trucks and SUVs on American roads began to grow rapidly. In recent years, nearly 4 out of every 5 vehicles sold in the country fell into the light truck category. That includes pickups, crossovers, and SUVs. Once you realize how these labels work, those numbers don't seem quite so shocking. To understand how trucks came to dominate American roads, it helps to look at how the rules were shaped. Years ago, there had to be a clear difference between regular passenger cars and everything else. That's when a definition came into play for something called a light truck. If they could make a vehicle fit into this flexible category, they could follow more straightforward rules, especially when it came to fuel efficiency. Trucks and SUVs had lower mileage standards compared to smaller cars. This helped manufacturers save money and made it easier to sell bigger vehicles. That loophole became a primary reason SUVs experienced a surge in popularity. Toyota started building trucks in the United States. Honda did the same with its SUVs. Hyundai followed suit. But this rule still gave American companies one more reason to focus on trucks. The law made sure foreign companies had to invest in American workers and factories to compete. That made it more complex and more expensive for them to break into the truck market. Then there's the real reason car makers in the United States have shifted so strongly to trucks: profit. Trucks and SUVs are simply more profitable. Even though they're bigger than sedans, they don't cost much more to make. The extra metal and materials barely change the cost. But the prices these vehicles sell for are much higher. And because the law favored trucks, U.S. companies spent years promoting them. They advertised them as the safest, strongest, most dependable vehicles for everyone. Whether someone lived in a small town or a big city, whether they worked in an office or on a farm, the message was always the same: a truck or SUV was the best choice. This constant push didn't just respond to what people wanted, it created that demand. People started believing they needed something larger and more challenging. So when automakers say they stopped making cars because people no longer wanted them, that's not the whole story. Their strategy and advertising made it happen. But there's a downside. As American car makers focused on trucks, they gave up a significant share of the overall car market. Today, the three largest U.S. car companies account for only about 40% of the country's auto industry. That's a massive drop from the past when they dominated the market, and maybe the most significant reason they walked away from building cars: they just weren't very good at it anymore. Buyers lost confidence. Many people began to feel that foreign car makers offered better value, better quality, and better reliability. American cars no longer inspired trust. In recent years, the largest American car makers have faced mounting problems with recalls, rankings, and public trust. In 2024, Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors held the first, second, and fourth spots for the most recalls among all car companies in the country. The following year, none of them appeared in the top 10 of Consumer Reports' reliability list. In fact, in the past 3 years, only one brand from the Detroit trio, Buick, has even made it into the top 11. But numbers alone don't tell the whole story. Chrysler, now part of the global group Stellantis, faced its own emission scandal in the last decade. In 2025, it finally recalled over 600,000 vehicles using its L87 engine, something that drivers had been complaining about for years. This engine, a 6.2-liter V8, was the heart of big GM vehicles like Suburbans, Silverados, Escalades, and others. Many of these engines were breaking down completely before reaching 100,000 miles. GM's internal reviews in 2022, 23, and 24 led nowhere. It wasn't until federal regulators stepped in that the real problems came to light, including defective crankshafts, connecting rods, and bearings. Thousands of complaints had been made, and some of the issues were tied to crashes, injuries, and over 40 reported fires. Altogether, it's become clear that the big three aren't making cars that Americans trust, and worse, they don't seem to be trying to fix that. Retake Chrysler. After merging with Peugeot's parent company in 2021, it became part of the Netherlands-based Stellantis group. In 2023, Stellantis made a record of $20 billion in profit. That year, it paid shareholders $7.5 billion and gave its CEO a massive $40 million paycheck. But that success came at a cost. Part of the profit came from raising prices across Dodge and Jeep vehicles. But it also involved cutting jobs and even closing one of its assembly plants. The results were visible. workers began striking, the quality of the vehicles suffered, and dealers found new models sitting unsold on lots longer than before. Still, the company didn't change course. In 2025, Stellantis launched another round of layoffs. It stopped buying back stock, but shareholders still approved dividend payouts. For investors, the company looks successful. For workers and drivers, the picture is far less hopeful. This reflects a deeper issue. Detroit's biggest automakers have survived through short-term fixes, job cuts, higher prices, and factory closures, but have sacrificed innovation, quality, and loyalty in the process. As they cling to old methods, new American companies are doing things differently. Tesla, for example, didn't need to change course. It started with a clean slate, built around electric vehicles from the beginning. That gave it an edge over older companies trying to retool their entire businesses. Rivian is now attempting the same with electric trucks. While still early in its journey, it could become the truck version of what Tesla was for electric cars. So this is how American cars are getting so bad with every passing day. If you enjoyed this video, press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.